manipulated and abused to, I guess, carry out the objective and mission of someone just because they can. I think that's...
The courtroom is silent, the air heavy with tension. Everyone is waiting for the judge's words, waiting to see what will happen to the woman sitting at the defense table, a woman who, not long ago, wore the robe herself. Then the words fall. 6 months in jail, no probation, no delay. Just 6 months behind bars. The gasp that ripples through the room is immediate, sharp. Supporters cry out. Someone lunges forward toward the defense table. And then, chaos. Deputies move quickly, grabbing Tracie Hunter. But she doesn't get up. Instead, she goes limp, her heels scraping across the carpet as officers drag her out of the courtroom. People scream, others cry, and the scene spirals into one of the most shocking courtroom moments ever caught on camera. A sitting judge, sentenced to jail, carried out like a defiant protester. To understand how it all came to this, you have to go back. Tracie Hunter wasn't just any defendant. She had been Hamilton County's first elected African-American juvenile court judge in Cincinnati, Ohio. For her supporters, she represented progress, a breakthrough in a system long criticized for inequality. But in 2014, everything began to unravel. She was convicted of misusing her position as a judge to help her brother, a juvenile corrections officer who faced disciplinary action at work. Prosecutors argued she crossed a legal line, using confidential court documents improperly to try to help him. Her defense claimed she hadn't broken the law at all, that what she did was part of her role as a judge. Still, the jury found her guilty of a single felony charge, and she was sentenced to 6 months in jail. But Hunter never accepted that outcome quietly. She appealed again and again, fighting the ruling for nearly 5 years. During that time, she continued to serve, technically still a judge, though her role was stripped down. She became a symbol in Cincinnati. To some, a warning of corruption and abuse of power, and to others, a victim of a system that wanted her gone. On that fateful day, when her last appeal was denied, she walked into court knowing she might walk out in handcuffs. The presiding judge wasted no time. "You are to do 6 months in the Hamilton County Justice Center," he ordered. "Deputy, take her away." The words were cold, final, and that was when the chaos erupted. Supporters in the gallery cried out, some shouting in disbelief. Hunter, refusing to walk, allowed herself to be dragged, passive but unyielding. "Very passive-aggressive," one courtroom observer later said. Just planked out and was dragged, literally dragged, her heels scraping on the carpet. Others said you could see it in her eyes. The shock, the disbelief, the silent protest of someone who once commanded authority in that very room. The scene spread across national headlines, not just because of the spectacle, but because of what it represented. Many in the African-American community saw it as racial injustice. They argued that if Hunter had been a white judge, the punishment would have been different, or perhaps avoided altogether. Protests broke out in Cincinnati. Demonstrators carried signs and wore shirts demanding justice for Hunter. One protester inside the courtroom that day was held in contempt and briefly detained after refusing to quiet down. But Judge Norbert Nadel, who handed down the original sentence years earlier, insisted race played no role. "An elected public official is held to a higher standard than anybody else," he said firmly. "I went through every court, and every court agreed with what I did 5 years ago." To him, the case was simple. She was convicted, the appeals were exhausted, and the sentence had to be served. Yet the outrage continued. For Hunter's supporters, this wasn't just about a single conviction. It was about trust in the system. To them, dragging a black judge across a courtroom floor in front of her community was more than punishment. It was humiliation, a public stripping of dignity. Once in the hallway, away from the screaming, Hunter finally stood and walked on her own, escorted by deputies to an elevator. Before entering, she slipped off her high heels, a small but telling gesture of someone preparing herself for jail. In that moment, even critics admitted, it was surreal. A judge who once gave sentences now preparing to serve one. Hunter's 6-month sentence was eventually reduced, and she served about 76 days in jail. But those 76 days left their mark. Jail, she later said, was brutal, physically, mentally, spiritually. Yet when she walked out of the Hamilton County Justice Center, greeted by cheers, flowers, and signs calling for her exoneration, she did so on her own 2 feet. She was thinner, tired, but resolute. And she was ready to speak. Standing before cameras and a crowd of supporters, she began not with anger, but with scripture. From the Book of Acts, when it was daylight, the magistrates sent their officers to the jailer with the order, "Release those men." But Paul said, "They beat us publicly without a trial, even though we are Roman citizens. And now they want to get rid of us quietly? No." Hunter told the crowd that, like Paul, she had been thrown in jail publicly, and therefore would walk out publicly, in defiance, in strength. She thanked her family, her church, and her community for standing by her. And then she delivered a line that echoed with determination. "I am still strong. I am still here. I am still standing. And I am still ready and committed to fight for justice and equality until truth and righteousness prevail." Her words weren't just about her case. They were about the years of division, the protests, the belief that her conviction had been unjust. She vowed to keep fighting until her name was cleared, refusing to accept the idea that her career, her reputation, or her future was over. For many, her release was bittersweet. To some, she remained a disgraced official, a judge who crossed ethical boundaries. To others, she was a martyr of a biased system, punished not for corruption, but for who she was and what she represented. The story of Tracie Hunter isn't a simple one. It's about power, race, politics, and the fragile trust between a community and its courts. It's about the image of a judge dragged across a courtroom floor, heels scraping against the carpet, and how that moment became bigger than the case itself. It's about the outrage of some, the satisfaction of others, and the lasting scars left behind. Years later, people still argue about what really happened. Was it justice? Or was it injustice dressed as law? But one thing remains undeniable. Tracie Hunter's case was unlike anything most Americans had ever seen before. A judge turned defendant. A robe exchanged for a jumpsuit. A fall from authority into a fight for survival. And as she once told her supporters, standing outside the jailhouse doors, "Jail did not destroy my resolve to pursue what is right." Her story is not just about one verdict, or even one courtroom. It is about a fracture in faith in fairness, in equality, in justice itself. And whether you believe she was guilty or wronged, that haunting image of her being dragged away will always linger, a symbol of a justice system under fire.